The SUV slammed through the wooden guardrail like it was made of matchsticks, splinters exploding into the cold Colorado night as the vehicle tipped nose first into the ravine, metal shrieking against rock before a sickening crunch cut everything short. And for one long, breathless second, there was only silence, the kind that made the air feel too thin to breathe. Then the car alarm started screaming. Ethan Cole's hands were still gripping the steering wheel, knuckles bone white, his forehead pressed against the cracked windshield, blood threading slowly down the glass in thin, trembling lines. He blinked once, twice, disoriented, the taste of iron flooding his mouth as he sucked in a sharp breath that burned his lungs. Oh God. Oh God. His voice came out hoarse, barely more than air. The passenger seat beside him was empty. That realization hit him harder than the impact. His head snapped to the right, vision swimming, scanning through the shattered side window into the darkness beyond, where the headlights cut jagged beams through pine branches and drifting snow. Maya? His voice rose, cracked, desperate now. Maya! No answer. Just wind threading through broken metal and the distant echo of the alarm. Ethan forced his hands to move, ignoring the deep ache in his ribs, fumbling at the seatbelt latch until it released with a click that felt too loud, too final. The sudden shift sent pain shooting through his side, and he sucked in air through clenched teeth, holding himself still for a second as the world tilted and steadied again. Think. Don't pass out. Don't you dare pass out. He pushed the driver's door, but it groaned uselessly, crushed inward. Damn it. His voice shook, anger mixing with panic now. He turned, crawling awkwardly across the center console, glass crunching under his palms, and dragged himself halfway through the broken passenger window, cold air slamming into him like a slap. Snow dusted his face instantly, sharp and real, grounding him. Maya! He shouted again, louder now, voice echoing off the canyon walls. Something shifted below. Not an answer. A movement. His stomach dropped. He twisted, leaning out further, and saw it 10 feet down the slope, tangled in scrub and rock, a dark shape barely visible under the weak spill of the headlights. No. No, no. Ethan dragged himself fully out of the car, boots slipping immediately on loose gravel as he staggered, caught himself against the dented door, breathing hard. Every instinct in his body screamed to stop, to assess, to call for help, but his hands were already moving, grabbing at branches, lowering himself down the slope in clumsy, desperate motions. Each step sent fresh jolts of pain through his body, but he barely registered it. All he could see was her. Maya lay on her side, one arm bent awkwardly beneath her, hair tangled with pine needles and streaked dark with blood. Her jacket was torn at the shoulder, the fabric soaked. Maya, hey, stay with me. He dropped to his knees beside her, hands hovering for a second before finally settling on her shoulders, afraid to move her too much, afraid not to. Maya, can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered, barely. A faint sound escaped her lips, something between a breath and a word. Relief hit him so hard it almost knocked him backward. Okay, you're okay, he said quickly, voice trembling, lying without hesitation. You're gonna be fine. I've got you. His fingers fumbled for his phone, dragging it from his pocket with clumsy urgency, but the screen was shattered, dark. No, come on, he muttered, pressing the power button repeatedly, as if force could fix it. Nothing. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to think past the rising panic. Highway was at least a mile up the road. No signal down here, even if the phone worked. Snow coming in heavier now. He looked down at Maya again, at the slow, uneven rise of her chest, at the blood that kept spreading despite the cold. You can't die here, he whispered, voice breaking, the weight of the words crushing him from the inside. You hear me? You can't. A memory flashed, sharp and unwanted, her laughing earlier that night, sitting across from him in the small diner just outside Aspen, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, eyes bright with something he hadn't seen in months. Hope. This changes things, Ethan, she had said, leaning forward, lowering her voice like the walls might hear. If what I found is real, it changes everything. He had brushed it off at first, skeptical, tired. You said that last time, but she hadn't smiled then. She had just held his gaze, steady and unflinching. No, this is different. Back in the ravine, Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, pushing the memory away as he pressed his jacket against her shoulder wound, applying pressure, his hands shaking. Stay with me, okay? Stay with me, he repeated, more to himself now than to her. Her breathing hitched, and her fingers twitched weakly against the ground. Ethan. His name barely made it out, thin and fragile. He leaned closer immediately. I'm here. I'm right here. Her lips parted, struggling to form words. He could see the effort in every tiny movement, the way her brow furrowed faintly despite everything. No. The words were barely audible, carried away almost instantly by the wind. Ethan froze, a coldness spreading through him that had nothing to do with the night air. Who knows? He asked, voice dropping, sharp now, focused despite the chaos. Her eyes tried to open again, but they only fluttered halfway before slipping closed. Maya? Maya? Stay with me. He shook her gently, panic rising again, clawing at his throat. For a moment, he thought she was gone. Then her chest lifted again, shallow but there. He exhaled, long and shaky, his mind racing now in a different direction entirely. They know. The words echoed, louder than the car alarm, louder than the wind. His gaze lifted slowly, scanning the darkness beyond the narrow cone of light. The trees loomed tall and silent, their shadows stretching and shifting in ways that made his skin crawl. He had the sudden, overwhelming feeling that they weren't alone. Get a grip, he muttered under his breath. But the words didn't steady him the way he wanted, because deep down, he knew Maya wouldn't say something like that unless she meant it. And if she meant it, a sound cut through the night. Not the wind, not the alarm, something deliberate. A crunch of footsteps on gravel, faint but unmistakable, somewhere up near the road. Ethan's head snapped up, every muscle in his body going rigid. He held his breath, listening. There it was again, slow, controlled, not someone rushing to help, someone approaching carefully. His heart began to pound, each beat heavy and loud in his ears. He glanced down at Maya, then back toward the slope, calculating distances, options. None of them good. If it was a passerby, he needed them. If it wasn't. His hand moved instinctively, searching the ground around him until his fingers closed around a jagged piece of broken metal from the car, sharp enough to serve as a weapon if it came to that. He didn't like how natural that felt. The footsteps stopped. Silence again. Worse than before. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice coming out low and controlled, despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Hello? No answer. Just the wind. His grip tightened on the metal shard, his mind racing through everything Maya had told him over the past few weeks, the files, the discrepancies, the names that didn't line up, the money that disappeared and reappeared in places it shouldn't. Corporate stuff, he had thought. White-collar crime at worst. Nothing like this. Nothing that ended with a car in a ravine and footsteps in the dark. Show yourself, he said, louder now, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Still nothing. But the silence felt different, charged, like something was waiting. Behind him, Maya stirred faintly, a soft, pained sound slipping from her lips. Ethan glanced back at her, torn for a split second, and that was when he saw it, a shadow shifting at the top of the slope, just beyond the reach of the headlights. Someone standing there, watching, his breath caught, every instinct screaming at him to move, to protect, to run, to fight, all at once. Who are you? He demanded, voice sharper now, fear bleeding through despite his effort to contain it. The figure didn't answer, didn't move closer, just stood there, a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the road above. And then, slowly, almost casually, it turned and walked away. Ethan stared, stunned, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. They weren't here to help. They weren't here to finish the job either. They were confirming something. A cold realization settled in his chest, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't an accident. He looked down at Maya again, at her pale face, at the blood staining the snow around her, and felt something shift inside him. Something harder, sharper than fear. Okay, he whispered, more to himself than to her, his jaw tightening. Okay, I get it now. The night felt different after that. Not just cold, but hostile, like the world itself had turned against them. Ethan adjusted his grip on the metal shard, then carefully slid one arm under Maya's shoulders, the other under her knees. Ignoring the way his body screamed in protest as he lifted her slightly, testing the movement, she let out a faint groan, and he froze instantly. I know, I'm sorry, he murmured, his voice softer again, the anger folding back into something protective, desperate. He looked up the slope, toward the road, toward where the figure had been, calculating again, this time with a new understanding. Whatever this was, whoever they were, they already knew where he was, and they had decided not to intervene yet. That meant time was limited, and whatever Maya had found, it was big enough to make someone watch instead of act. You're not dying here, he said again, more firmly this time, like a promise he intended to keep no matter what it cost. Then he started climbing. The slope fought him for every inch. Loose shale rolled under his boots, pine roots caught at his ankles, and twice he nearly lost his balance entirely when the weight of Maya shifted in his arms and sent a hot white stab through his ribs. He stopped after 3 steps, chest heaving, his breath bursting out in ragged clouds that vanished into the dark. He could feel her blood seeping through his sleeve, warm at first, then cooling almost instantly in the mountain air. And that terrified him more than the pain in his own body. Warm meant she was still here. Cooling meant time was moving faster than he could. "Stay with me," he muttered, not looking down because he knew if he checked her face too often, he would start reading death into every still second. "You don't get to check out on me now. Not after dragging me up here." He tried for bitterness, for the old reflex between them. That half-fighting, half-flirting rhythm that had once made difficult nights feel manageable, but his voice broke in the middle and turned into something raw. The air smelled like gasoline from the wreck, cold dirt, wet pine, and the metallic stink of blood. Far above, the road cut through the mountain like a black ribbon edged in snow. Headlights from the crashed SUV still shooting crooked beams into the trees below. No other cars, no sirens. Nothing except the ceaseless hiss of wind moving through the branches. He planted one knee against the incline, shifted Maya higher against his chest, and forced himself upward again. Each movement became mechanical. Find footing, test weight, breathe, lift. Don't think about how far. Don't think about what happens if you fall. He felt absurdly aware of stupid physical details. The scrape of her belt buckle against his forearm, the wet strands of her hair sticking to the back of his hand, the way one of her boots dragged and knocked rhythmically against his leg with each step. Those details anchored him. If he focused on them, he didn't have to focus on the darker thing unraveling in the back of his mind. The question that had already begun shaping itself into certainty. What if this had started long before the road, long before the skid, long before Maya said they know? What if he had walked them into this? He clenched his jaw and kept going. By the time he reached the top, his vision had narrowed into a tunnel rimmed with static. He nearly collapsed onto the shoulder, one knee hitting asphalt hard enough to send another jolt through his whole frame. For a few seconds, he could only kneel there in the weak wash of the SUV's tilted headlights. Maya cradled against him, both of them coated in dirt and shards of glittering safety glass. The road was empty in both directions, a mountain 2-lane curving out of sight between tall black pines. Snow feathered down more steadily now. Not yet a storm, but enough to soften the edges of everything. Ethan twisted and laid Maya as gently as he could on the strip of frozen grass beyond the shoulder. She made a low sound, barely conscious, and her eyelids fluttered. He brushed hair out of her face with fingers that no longer felt entirely connected to him. "Maya." Her name came out quiet this time, intimate, frightened. "Listen to me. I'm going to get help. I'm not leaving you alone, okay? I'm right here." Her lips moved. He leaned in until his ear was almost at her mouth. "Phone," she whispered. "In bag." He blinked, then turned sharply toward the SUV. The back seat, her satchel. He hadn't even thought of it. Adrenaline had narrowed his brain down to pulse points and movement. He scrambled up and lurched toward the vehicle, one hand pressed against his side. The passenger compartment was a ruin of deployed airbags, broken glass, and twisted plastic. He shone the weak beam of the glove compartment light into the back seat and spotted the leather strap half buried under a fallen binder. He reached in, hissed as his ribs protested, and yanked the bag free. Papers spilled onto the floorboard, a small voice recorder, a manila envelope, a water bottle rolling under the seat. He found her phone in the side pocket, screen spiderwebbed but alive. "Yes," he breathed, and for a fleeting second relief was so strong it almost made him laugh. Then he saw the corner of the screen. No service. He turned in a slow circle outside the car, lifting the phone higher as if altitude alone could change physics. One bar flickered, vanished, came back, vanished again. He took 3 limping steps toward the bend in the road and held the phone up with a hand that shook so badly he could barely tap. Emergency call. Searching. Spinning. Nothing. Come on, come on. He started walking, then jogging in short, uneven bursts along the shoulder, every few yards glancing back to make sure Maya was still there, still visible, still breathing. On the 4th try, the call connected with a harsh burst of static. Ethan almost dropped the phone. 911. What is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was thin, broken by interference, but human. Real. He nearly sagged with gratitude. Car accident, he said too fast. Route 82, maybe 12 miles outside Aspen, near the old canyon turnout. We went off the road. 1 female severe blood loss, possible shoulder injury. Maybe more. I don't know. I can't. He stopped himself, forced air in. Please, We need an ambulance now. Sir, I need you to stay on the line. Can you confirm? Static swallowed the rest. Hello? Ethan moved another few steps up the road. Phone raised. I'm here. I'm here. The dispatcher cut back in fragments. Units. Weather delay. State patrol. 30 to 40. The line crackled hard, then died. He stared at the dark screen, then at the empty road. 30 to 40 minutes in mountain weather. He looked back at Maya lying in the snow-dusted grass, and knew with cold clarity that 30 minutes might be the same as never. His eyes dropped to the satchel still clutched in his left hand. He hadn't realized he'd carried it with him. The strap had wrapped around his wrist. He crouched beside Maya again and set the bag down, opening it with hurried fingers. The first thing he saw was the envelope. Thick, unsealed, marked in Maya's handwriting. If something happens to me. His stomach turned over so violently he had to pause. The letters were all caps, heavy pressure, written with the same determined hand she used when she was trying not to show she was scared. He looked at her face, at the blood drying near her temple, then back at the envelope. Jesus, Maya. He pulled out the papers. Not papers. Photocopies. Financial statements, internal transfer logs, one property deed, and on top, a photograph of 3 people stepping out of a black SUV in front of a private hospital entrance in Denver. One of them was unmistakable even in profile. Senator Richard Vail, Colorado's polished reformist golden boy, smiling for cameras in rolled-up sleeves and speaking like every problem in the country could be fixed if people would just trust someone decent for once. Ethan knew the type too well. He had spent 12 years as an investigative journalist in Chicago and D.C., and men like Vail built careers on moral clarity performed under good lighting. But the person beside him in the photo made Ethan's pulse kick harder. Caroline Wren, CEO of Aegis Biodyne, Maya's employer. The woman whose company was supposedly under audit for irregular billing and research grant fraud, the same woman Maya had once described over drinks as the kind of rich that doesn't need money, just immunity. Ethan flipped through faster. Names, shell companies, transfers routed through nonprofit health initiatives, rural hospital closures followed by land acquisition, a judge's brother on a consulting contract. And then a memo clipped at the back, stamped confidential, detailing off-book settlements tied to a clinical trial that had never been publicly disclosed. Ethan felt the world around him recede, the road, the snow, the pain, all of it draining to a hum while his brain locked onto the implications. This wasn't just corporate theft, it was buried deaths. Rural patients enrolled without informed consent, complications reclassified, families paid through intermediaries with airtight NDAs. He understood now why Maya had looked different in the diner, why hope and fear had been braided together in her face. This wasn't a story that changed things. This was a story that detonated lives. He swallowed and kept reading until Maya moved again and pulled him violently back into the present. He dropped the papers, leaned over her. Her eyes were open a sliver, unfocused but trying. "Burn it," she whispered. He stared at her. "What?" Her mouth trembled with the effort of speech. "If they take it, they bury it. Burn it. Don't let them." She coughed, winced, then shut her eyes tight as pain rolled through her. Ethan felt anger flare, sudden and confused. No. No. I'm not burning it. This is why they did this. This is exactly why." He stopped because the look she gave him, even half-conscious, was fierce enough to slice through him. It wasn't fear for the evidence. It was fear for him. Ethan. His name was barely audible. "You don't understand." And maybe he didn't. Maybe she had understood the size of this for longer than he had, and that difference mattered. He thought of the figure on the ridge, not rushing, not helping, just watching. He looked down the road. Empty. He looked at the documents in his lap, damp now at the corners from snow. Then he saw the small voice recorder and picked it up. There was a single file loaded, time-stamped 2 hours earlier. He pressed play and held the device close. Maya's voice came through, low and controlled, recorded in what sounded like a parked car, maybe before she came into the diner. "If you're hearing this, I either got scared too late or I was right too early. The account chain starts with St. Catherine's Outreach Fund, then folds into Vail Community Action, then crosses through Wren Strategic Holdings. It looks legal until you map the patient transfer lists against the mortality adjustments. 7 dead that I could confirm. Probably more. Ethan, if it gets to you, do not go to the police first. Half of them will do their jobs, and half will hand it upward. Go to Lena Ortiz in Denver. She still owes you. Her station can force daylight. And if I'm the one who gave you this, and I look like I'm not scared, I'm lying. I'm terrified." The recording clicked off. Ethan sat very still, cold seeping through his jeans from the frozen ground. Lena Ortiz. He hadn't heard that name in 3 years. Former producer, former almost something. The person who had finally gotten tired of loving a man who kept choosing the story over the life around it. He remembered her apartment in D.C., the smell of burnt coffee at 2 a.m. The way she had stood in the doorway with tears in her eyes and said, "One day you're going to drag trouble home and act shocked when it comes through the door." He had called her unfair. She had called him predictable. Both had been right. Maya made a faint sound, and Ethan put the recorder down. His thoughts were turning ugly now, toward the places he usually kept locked. Why had Maya brought him into this? Because he was good? Because she trusted him? Or because he was expendable in ways she wasn't? The thought disgusted him the second it formed, but once it existed, he couldn't fully unthink it. He looked at her face and hated himself for the suspicion. She had just been thrown out of a moving life into a ravine. She had recorded instructions because she expected to die. Whatever anger existed between them, whatever history of half-finished conversations and professional overlap and complicated attraction, neither had ever named cleanly. None of that justified doubting her now. Still, doubt was there. Not doubt about her fear. Doubt about how far this had already gone before tonight. He heard an engine in the distance and sprang to his feet, heart slamming. Headlights appeared around the far curve, bright and blinding through the snow. He stepped into the road and waved both arms, shouting. The pickup slowed hard, brakes squealing on the icy blacktop, and came to a stop 20 feet ahead. An older man in a tan work jacket got out first, hands raised instinctively in alarm. A woman followed from the passenger side, already pulling her phone free. "Oh my God," she said, taking in the wreck, and Maya on the ground. "Sir, are you hurt?" "We both are," Ethan said. "She's worse. I called 911. They said 30 to 40 minutes. The woman was already moving toward Maya, kneeling carefully. "I'm a nurse," she said. "ER, Glenwood Springs." Ethan felt another fierce, almost painful rush of relief. The man came over and steadied Ethan by the elbow when his knees threatened to give. "Easy there, son." Ethan almost flinched at the kindness. It felt undeserved. The nurse, a woman in her 50s with windburned cheeks and steady eyes, opened her bag and pulled on gloves with practiced speed. "What's her name?" "Maya." "Maya, honey, I'm Janice. I'm going to check you over." Her voice changed instantly into something calm, authoritative, deeply human. She cut away part of Maya's torn jacket, inspected the wound, palpated gently along her neck and collarbone, while talking to keep her conscious. "Okay. Significant blood loss. Maybe clavicle, maybe scapula. Could be internal injuries. We keep her warm, keep pressure here, minimal movement unless airway changes." She looked up at Ethan. "Can you do exactly what I say?" He nodded at once. "Good. Then stay useful." The words should have stung, but they landed like a lifeline. Useful was something he knew how to be. He knelt opposite her and followed instructions, pressing folded gauze where she directed, holding Maya's hand when Janice told him that voice and contact mattered. Maya's fingers curled weakly around his. Her skin felt frighteningly cold. The pickup's headlights lit the scene now, adding a harsh yellow wash to the blue-white snow. Somewhere farther down the canyon, a siren finally rose, thin and distant, bouncing strangely off the rock walls. Ethan looked at Maya as her eyes cracked open again. She found him for a second. Really found him. And in that second, there was recognition, apology, and something else he couldn't bear to name because it was too close to hope. "Don't let them make me disappear," she whispered. Ethan bent close, his forehead almost touching hers. "I won't." The promise came out before he had measured it against reality, before he had weighed what it would cost, before he had admitted that keeping it might mean setting fire to what little remained of the life he had rebuilt after journalism burned him out. Janice pressed harder over the wound and told Maya to save her strength. Ethan stayed where he was, one hand red with her blood, the other gripping the recorder in his coat pocket like it was the only solid object left in the world, while the sirens drew closer through the mountain dark, and the documents at his knee grew damp with snow, each page carrying the kind of truth that could save strangers and ruin everyone he had left. While the sirens drew closer through the mountain dark, and the documents at his knee grew damp with snow, each page carrying the kind of truth that could save strangers and ruin everyone he had left. The first patrol cruiser arrived too fast for the conditions, fishtailing slightly before straightening on the shoulder with a spray of slush, red and blue lights washing the canyon in violent color. An ambulance followed seconds later. Then another vehicle Ethan recognized only after it stopped, and the county emblem flashed across the door under the strobing lights. Sheriff's Department. He felt the recognition physically, like another bruise surfacing under the skin. Two paramedics came at a run with a stretcher and trauma bags, their boots striking the pavement with flat, urgent thuds, and suddenly, the quiet little island of survival Janice had built around Maya disappeared beneath protocol, clipped voices, Velcro tears, and the sterile smell of opened medical supplies. "What do we got?" one of the paramedics asked, dropping to his knees. Janice answered without hesitation. "Female, 30s, MVC rollover down ravine, ejected or self-extricated, significant blood loss from shoulder laceration, possible clavicle, possible chest involvement, intermittent consciousness, skin cold, radial weak." The paramedic nodded once, already cutting away more fabric, already fitting an oxygen mask over Maya's face. Ethan shifted back to give them space, but one of them looked up sharply. "Sir, don't move, you're bleeding." Ethan looked down like the information belonged to someone else. Blood on his jacket, blood on his hands, blood drying at his hairline. He felt almost offended by the inconvenience of his own body. "I'm fine." The paramedic didn't bother arguing. "Sit down anyway." A deputy with a broad chest and a campaign smile face approached while the medics worked. Mid-40s, clean shave, hat dusted with snow, hand resting too casually near his holster. "Evening," he said, in the tone of a man at a neighborhood barbecue, not a roadside trauma. "I'm Deputy Mark Delaney." "You were driving?" Ethan stared at him a beat too long before answering. "Yes. License and registration when you get a chance." Ethan let out a disbelieving breath. "My passenger is bleeding out." Delaney kept the smile, but it thinned. "And I still need to ask what happened." Ethan felt anger rise with such speed it startled even him. Not theatrical anger, not something hot and useful. This was colder, meaner, the kind that came from old injuries finding new excuses. He had spent enough years around cops to know the flavors of them. Some were decent, some were lazy, some wore friendliness like insulation. Delaney's voice had that insulated quality, like nothing in front of him could touch him unless paperwork required it. "We were run off the road," Ethan said. "Or hit. I don't know. We spun. Went through the guardrail." Delaney's eyebrows lifted a fraction. "Hit by who?" Ethan looked at him, then beyond him, to the dark tree line, involuntarily replaying the silhouette on the ridge. "I didn't see a plate." Delaney pulled a small notebook from his pocket and flipped it open with one gloved hand. "Were you drinking tonight, mister?" "Cole." Ethan's jaw flexed. "No." "Medication?" "No." "Argument with the passenger?" That one landed harder because it came too close to the truth, or at least to the shape of it. Not an argument in the screaming sense. Tension. Old history. Mistrust braided into urgency. Ethan heard himself answer, "No," and hated the speed of it, hated the way even now he was curating reality into something more usable. Delaney studied his face for another second, then glanced toward the medics. "And the passenger's full name?" Ethan hesitated, not because he didn't know it, because every name suddenly felt like a vulnerable thing. "Maya Bennett." Delaney wrote it down. Ethan watched his pen move, and had the brief irrational urge to snatch the notebook away and tear the page out. Behind them, the ambulance crew rolled Maya carefully onto a backboard. She cried out behind the oxygen mask, a broken, involuntary sound that cut straight through him. He moved instantly, but a paramedic put a firm hand to his chest. "Let us work." Ethan held up both hands, stepped back, then took one pace to the side so Maya could still see him if her eyes opened. He could not stop tracking the details. The moisture crystallizing in Janice's hair at the temples, the hiss of oxygen, the way one paramedic's gloved hands turned pink where blood soaked through, the sheriff's SUV idling with exhaust puffing into the snow-lit dark. Delaney noticing the satchel at Ethan's feet. That last detail hit him like an electric pulse. Delaney's eyes dropped. "Not long. Just enough." "Yours?" he asked. Ethan's hand closed over the strap before he meant to move. "Yes." Delaney's gaze came back up. Friendly again. "Need me to secure any belongings before the tow gets here?" "No. Too fast." Ethan heard it himself. Delaney heard it too. His pen stopped over the page. "All right," he said mildly. "You can hand it over to EMS if you're headed to the hospital." Ethan forced his grip to loosen, forced his face into something less guarded. "I said I've got it." Delaney held his eyes, and for one suspended second Ethan could not tell whether the deputy knew exactly what was in the bag or merely sensed that the bag mattered. Either possibility was bad. The sirens had filled the night with noise, but beneath that noise Ethan became aware of another sound. The subtle, relentless ticking of choices closing behind him. He could go with Maya and keep the evidence close. He could hand it to someone official and pray Maya had been wrong about the chain of contamination. He could call Lena from the hospital and blow up the next 48 hours of his life. None of those paths ended cleanly. One of the paramedics approached him with a cervical collar. "Sir, sit down now or I'll make you." The bluntness almost made him smile. He let himself be guided onto the rear bumper of the ambulance. As the paramedic checked his pupils and palpated his ribs, Ethan turned his head enough to keep Delaney in view. The deputy was talking to the tow driver now. Casual posture, notebook tucked away, but his attention kept drifting back, not to Ethan, to the satchel. Ethan's mind sped up in that dangerous, crystalline way it used to during investigations, when exhaustion and adrenaline combined into a kind of merciless clarity. Maya had said, "Don't go to the police first." The recorder had repeated it. If Delaney was clean, Ethan would be making an enemy for no reason. If Delaney wasn't, one wrong sentence could erase whatever chance Maya still had. The paramedic pressed against Ethan's ribs and he hissed. "Probably cracked, maybe bruised cartilage," the man said. "You need imaging." "I'll live. Everybody says that in the parking lot." The paramedic taped gauze to Ethan's forehead. "The smart ones let us check anyway." Ethan looked past him. The medics were loading Maya into the ambulance. Her face had gone pale to the point of translucence, freckles standing out across the bridge of her nose, lashes wet with melted snow. One of her hands slipped from under the blanket and hung there until Janice tucked it back in. Ethan stood before anyone could stop him and caught the ambulance door. "I'm riding with her." Delaney took 2 steps forward. "Need to finish my questions first." Ethan turned to him slowly. He felt the mountain cold in his lungs and a darker cold settling underneath it. "Then come to the hospital." Delaney's expression didn't change, but the pause was there. A beat too long. "I can do that," he said. "Need your bag searched before transport?" Ethan actually laughed once, short and unbelieving. "On what grounds?" Delaney's shoulders lifted a fraction. "Standard scene safety. Could contain meds, weapons, anything." Ethan looked at the deputy, really looked, and saw what he had missed at first. Not corruption exactly, not proven, but intention. Pressure delivered under the cover of routine. He felt that old reporter instinct uncurl completely now, the one that had gotten him sued twice and divorced once from the version of life everyone said was healthier. He shifted the satchel behind his leg and said, very evenly, "Then get a warrant." Something flashed across Delaney's face, brief and ugly before the smile came back. "Suit yourself." Janice, standing by the open ambulance, looked between them with the quick evaluation of someone who had spent years in ERs reading conflict before it became violence. "Either he comes now," she said flatly, "or you can ask your questions after we stop that woman from dying." Delaney stepped back. "Go." Ethan climbed into the ambulance. The doors shut with a metallic boom that sealed in bright fluorescent light, antiseptic air, and the frantic intimacy of emergency medicine. The world outside reduced to sirens and blurred flashes through the rear windows. One paramedic started an IV, while the other monitored Maya's vitals and called ahead to Aspen Valley Hospital. Ethan sat on the narrow bench, collar around his neck, satchel clamped between his knees, and watched Maya breathe under the mask. The oxygen fogged the clear plastic with each shallow exhale. He could not stop staring at that proof of life. When one breath took slightly longer than the last, his own lungs forgot how to work until the next came. The ambulance rocked through the canyon, suspension rattling over rough patches, cabinets clicking with each turn. Ethan braced one hand against the wall and finally looked down at himself. His jeans were torn at the knee, dirt embedded in the fabric, blood dried in a dark fan over his cuff. He felt suddenly, absurdly ashamed of how he must look. Not because appearance mattered in crisis, but because it reminded him too much of the years when his life had been a string of scenes like this, bad lighting and bad coffee, and people's worst days laid open in front of him while he translated them into copy before the adrenaline wore off. He had left that life in Chicago after the Mercer expose collapsed under legal pressure, and one source wound up dead of an accidental overdose 3 weeks after telling Ethan he was ready to go on the record. Ethan still dreamed about that source, still woke hearing the man say, "You promise this won't get buried?" In the narrow hallway outside a federal building. Ethan had promised. It got buried anyway, along with him, in every way that counted. Maya's eyes flickered open. The paramedic leaned in. "Maya, stay with me. Can you tell me where you hurt?" Her gaze drifted, found Ethan. Stayed there. He leaned forward immediately. "I'm here." Her pupils were glassy, but consciousness sharpened for a split second. "Bag," she whispered behind the mask. "Don't." He nodded before she finished. "I know." Her eyes closed again, and Ethan felt the unbearable weight of being trusted by someone who might not survive the next 20 minutes. There was no honor in it, no nobility, just pressure. just the knowledge that trust was always easiest to receive, right before it became impossible to carry. By the time they reached the hospital, snow had thickened into a steady sheet that made the parking lot lights bloom halos in the dark. Aspen Valley's ER entrance glowed too bright. Automatic doors sliding open and shut on warmth, fluorescent light, and the faint smell of bleach that clung to every hospital in America, no matter how expensive the zip code outside. Orderlies met the gurney and took over in a practiced rush, wheels rattling over the threshold, voices stacking over one another. Female mid-30s, MVA, hypotensive, blood loss, possible thoracic involvement. Ethan followed until a nurse stopped him with a palm against his sternum. "You need to check in. I'm with her. And she needs treatment." Her tone softened just a degree. "Let them work." He stood there breathing hard while the trauma doors swung shut behind Maya. The silence after the doors closed felt indecent. He looked down at the blood drying on his hands, and suddenly the hospital around him came into focus in excruciating detail. A toddler crying somewhere in pediatrics. A television mounted in a corner with muted cable news captions scrolling beneath the face of Senator Richard Vail, smiling at a fundraiser podium. The squeak of rubber soles on polished floor. A vending machine humming near a row of molded plastic chairs. Christmas lights still looped around the volunteer desk even though it was late January, one strand blinking out of rhythm. America did this well, he thought suddenly, with a kind of bitter affection. Disaster under fluorescent lighting, terror organized by clipboards. A registrar appeared with a tablet and asked for his insurance card. Ethan almost laughed again. Instead, he gave his name, date of birth, and a card from his wallet while never letting go of the satchel. 10 minutes later, he was in imaging against his will. Then in a curtained exam bay with a cracked rib diagnosis, 6 stitches at the hairline, and a physician assistant advising rest he had no intention of taking. His phone, salvaged from Maya's bag charger in the ambulance, now held 2 bars of service. Enough. He sat on the edge of the hospital bed, pain radiating through his side with each breath, and stared at Lena Ortiz's contact for a full 30 seconds before pressing call. It rang 4 times. Voicemail. He almost hung up. Then her voice, older than he remembered, and somehow steadier, came through live instead of recorded. This better be someone dying. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second. Maybe. Silence. Then, Ethan? He had forgotten what hearing recognition could do to a name. Yeah. Another silence, shorter now, packed with history. Neither of them had time to unpack. "It's 2 in the morning, she said. "So either you relapsed, got arrested, or something very bad happened." Maya Bennett. Aegis Biodyne. Car crash outside Aspen. She had files. He could hear her moving, the rustle of sheets, a lamp switch clicking, professionalism climbing over sleep in real time. "Slow down. Who's Maya Bennett?" "Senior compliance analyst. Maybe whistleblower. Clinical trial deaths buried through shell nonprofits tied to Vail and Caroline Wren. She's in surgery, or heading there now. Local deputy already showed interest in her bag." He paused, forcing himself to be precise. "She told me not to go to the police. She told me to go to you." The line went very quiet. "You have proof?" "I have copies. Transfer logs. Settlement memo. Photo. Voice recording. Enough to make people nervous, not enough to publish blind." "Where are you exactly?" "Aspen Valley Hospital." "Listen to me carefully," Lena said, and the old command in her voice hit him like a muscle memory. "Do not hand anything to local law enforcement. Do not leave that bag in your room. Photograph everything now and send it to 3 places. Mine, yours, and an external drive if you can get one. I'm waking legal and calling our Denver bureau chief. If Vail's in this, daylight is your only protection." Daylight. The word made his stomach knot. Exposure as shield. He had believed in that once with an almost religious certainty. He had also seen how often daylight came late, after the damage was done. "Ethan," Lena said, softer now. "Did you hear me?" He looked through the curtain gap toward the waiting area, where 2 sheriff's deputies had just come through the ER doors, hats in hand, scanning the room. One of them was Delaney. Ethan felt every muscle in his body tighten. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I heard you." "What's wrong?" Lena asked. Ethan kept his eyes on Delaney, as the deputy spoke to the front desk clerk and then turned, searching with patient, practiced calm. "Company just arrived." "Then move," Lena said instantly. All sleep gone now, replaced by that clipped producer's focus that used to terrify interns and save broadcasts. "Not panic, move. Can you walk?" Ethan slid off the edge of the bed, ignoring the sharp protest in his rib. "Yeah, good. You need copies before they get near you. Bathroom, supply closet, anywhere with a door. Use your phone, page by page. Send them while you shoot. Don't wait until the end." He grabbed the satchel and stepped toward the back of the curtained bay, just as Delaney's shadow crossed the gap. "And Ethan," Lena added, her voice dropping half a register, suddenly personal in a way that cut through the adrenaline. "Do not try to be heroic, be efficient." He almost said, "Too late for that," but there was no time. "Stay on the line." He slipped out the rear side of the exam area, into a short connecting corridor, lined with linen carts and humming supply cabinets. The hospital at that hour felt suspended between public and private life, not fully awake, not fully asleep. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a faint electric tremor. Air conditioning drifted cold through the vents, carrying antiseptic, old coffee, and the ghost smell of industrial laundry detergent from the stacked sheets behind half-open doors. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped steadily, calm in a way that felt almost insulting. Ethan moved fast, but not visibly fast, forcing his body into something like a normal pace even while his pulse hammered so hard he could feel it in the back of his throat. His hospital socks slipped slightly on the polished floor until he shoved his feet back into his shoes without untying them. He found a single-stall staff restroom at the end of the corridor, ducked inside, locked the door, and set the satchel on the closed toilet lid with hands that had lost all pretense of steadiness. "I'm in," he whispered. Lena's breathing came quietly through the phone. "Start." He pulled the documents out one stack at a time and began shooting them with the camera, flattening curling pages against the sink, adjusting angles, cursing the harsh overhead glare on glossy paper. The first few images blurred because his fingers were shaking too badly. He forced himself to stop, inhale slowly through his nose, exhale, and start again. A transfer ledger. Another. The settlement memo. The deed. The photo of Vale and Wren. He sent each file as soon as it captured. First to Lena, then to his own email, then to a cloud drive he had nearly forgotten he still paid for. Each upload bar crawled like it resented urgency. "If I lose signal," he began. "You won't lose what already left," Lena said. "Keep going." He photographed the voice recorder too, then realized that was meaningless, and instead set his phone beside it, pressed play, and recorded the playback as a video with subtitles off. Maya's thin recorded voice filling the tiled bathroom in a way that made the room feel suddenly too small. "If you're hearing this, I either got scared too late, or I was right too early." Ethan shut his eyes for 1 second, not from sentimentality, but because hearing fear documented so calmly was unbearable. He kept recording until the file ended. He sent that too. There was a knock on the restroom door, polite at first. Ethan froze. "Occupied," he called, aiming for annoyed rather than alarmed. A beat. "Sir?" Delaney's voice, muffled by the door, but unmistakable. "Need a moment of your time." Ethan looked at the cheap lock, the gap at the bottom of the door, the vent above him, every useless escape route that movies trained people to imagine. Lena heard the silence. "That him?" "Yeah. How many ways out?" Ethan gave a dry breath that might have been a laugh in another life. "One, unless I become steam." Another knock, firmer. "Mr. Cole." Ethan shoved the last of the documents back into the satchel, except for the settlement memo and the photo, which he folded once and slid into the inner lining of his hospital gown on instinct, like a pickpocket reversing direction. "Listen to me," Lena said. "If he makes this official, ask for hospital security, and ask if you are being detained. Make him define it. Don't consent to a search. Don't get cute. Is there any chance he's just doing his job?" Ethan thought of the notebook, the smile, the pressure hidden inside routine. "There's a chance," he said. "I just don't trust it." The knob rattled once. Ethan flinched. "Mr. Cole, open the door." 1 second. He hung up before Lena could say more, stuffed the phone into his pocket, splashed cold water on his face, and unlocked the door. Delaney stood there with another deputy Ethan hadn't seen before. Younger, red-haired, trying too hard to look neutral. Delaney's expression was still calm, still neighborly, but the warmth was gone now. "Everything all right?" he asked. Ethan stepped out, letting the door swing shut behind him. "I'm in a hospital restroom at 2:30 in the morning after a wreck, so no." The younger deputy's eyes flicked to the satchel. Delaney followed the look without moving his head. "We need to finish our report. Might also need your belongings logged if they were involved in the crash." Ethan folded his arms because the movement protected his ribs and hid how much pain he was in. They weren't. This bag was at the scene. So was Snow. Delaney let the silence sit for a moment, then lowered his voice. "You seem anxious about a simple evidence hold." Ethan felt something hot flash through him. "Evidence of what?" "That's what I'm determining. Without probable cause?" The younger deputy shifted slightly at that, discomfort flickering across his face. Delaney noticed it too. He smiled again, smaller this time. Nobody's accusing you of anything, Mr. Cole, but your passenger may have committed theft of proprietary materials. If that property belongs to her employer, Ethan stared at him. That was the first open tell. Too specific, too fast, not a fishing question, a destination disguised as one. Her employer called you already? He asked. Delaney didn't answer. Ethan stepped closer before thinking better of it. She hadn't even hit the OR yet. Delaney's jaw tightened almost invisibly. You were in an accident. Powerful people make calls when employees turn up in ravines. There it was. Not a denial. Just enough truth wrapped around manipulation to make outrage sound unreasonable. Ethan's reporter brain, battered as it was, locked onto the language. Powerful people. Calls. Employees. No mention of concern. No mention of crime. He saw, suddenly and vividly, how this might already be structuring itself beyond him. A distressed worker, possible mental health issue, unauthorized documents, reckless late-night driving, tragic accident. A whole usable narrative, waiting patiently for facts to be bent into it. I want a lawyer, Ethan said. Delaney opened his hands. You're free to call one. And until then? Until then, I'd advise cooperation. Ethan looked at the younger deputy. What's your name? The kid hesitated. Deputy Harris. Deputy Harris, Ethan said, keeping his voice calm. Am I being detained? Harris looked to Delaney before answering. Mistake. Human, revealing mistake. No, sir. Then I'm done talking. Delaney took one step into Ethan's path as he tried to move past. Not aggressive enough to call a shove. Just present enough to make refusal physical. Hospital security can help us sort this out, Delaney said. Great, Ethan replied. Let's get them. That landed. Not because security would save him necessarily, but because witnesses complicated quiet coercion. Delaney let him pass. Stay in the building. Wasn't planning to go skiing. Ethan walked away without looking back, but every nerve in his body insisted they were still watching him. He turned the corner into the main ER corridor and nearly collided with Janice, the nurse from the pickup, now holding 2 paper cups of vending machine coffee and looking exhausted in a deeply competent way. There you are, she said. I told them I knew you. Thought it might help if anyone asked why some half-dead man was trying to out stubborn law enforcement. Ethan blinked. You stayed? I started this. Didn't feel right driving off. She took in his face, then the satchel, then the direction he had come from. How bad? He considered lying and didn't have the energy. Potentially catastrophic. Janice handed him one of the coffees. It smelled burnt and medicinal, but it was hot. That specific, huh? He took a careful sip and winced as heat hit his empty stomach. You know when someone asks questions that are supposed to sound routine. I work triage. Half my life is routine questions from people trying to hide the real one. She nodded once. So, catastrophic. They sat in silence for a moment in the waiting room, under the muted television and its endless crawl of headlines. A ranching accident in Pueblo, a weather advisory for the Western Slope, a fundraising gala featuring Senator Vail and philanthropist Caroline Wren, archival footage from earlier in the week looping under bright smiles and donor applause. Ethan watched it with a kind of numb disbelief. There they were, two-dimensional and polished, while Maya was probably under floodlights and sterile drapes with her life literally opened up. America loved this split-screen arrangement, he thought. Catastrophe below, image management above. Janice followed his gaze to the TV. You know them? I know enough. She didn't press. Instead, she asked, who is she to you? It should have been a simple question. It wasn't. Ethan stared into the coffee. The surface trembled slightly in his hand. Complicated. Janice gave a small, tired smile. Usually is. He let out a breath and tried to name it honestly, at least to himself. Maya had entered his life 9 months earlier, through a panel discussion in Denver on healthcare accountability, where she had stood at the back afterward in a charcoal coat, and waited until everyone else finished congratulating or criticizing him for an old series he barely wanted to talk about anymore. She had said, You're Ethan Cole, right? The Mercer case. Not admiration. Not accusation. More like an identification marker on an evidence board. He had said yes, and she had studied him for a second too long before asking, Did it ever stop feeling like your fault? He had laughed then, reflexively, because it was such an inappropriate question from a stranger. But she hadn't smiled. I'm serious. He remembered the conference room smell of stale coffee and carpet cleaner, the way her eyes had held his without flinching, the low snow beginning outside the hotel windows. That was how it started. Not romance. Recognition. Two people who had learned that truth was expensive, and often billed to the wrong account. They drifted into each other's orbit slowly, then all at once. Late-night calls about records requests, drinks that turned into arguments, arguments that turned into silences. Neither of them quite knew how to leave. There was attraction, yes, but it always seemed to arrive wearing body armor. Neither of them trusted anything easy. Janice's voice pulled him back. "You care about her." Ethan almost denied it out of habit. Instead, he nodded once. Janice looked toward the trauma wing. "Then brace yourself. Caring doesn't help with hospital waiting." The clock above reception moved with insulting steadiness. 20 minutes. 35. 40. Ethan recharged his phone at a wall outlet and texted Lena updated photos of Delaney from across the lobby, along with a short line. He floated theft of proprietary materials before official statement complete. She responded almost immediately. "Good. That's dumb enough to use. Denver Bureau has a crew on standby. Legal wants chain of custody preserved. Can you get attending names, surgery status, and anything on who calls for her?" Ethan started typing back when the trauma doors opened, and a surgeon in blue scrubs stepped out, mask hanging loose around her neck, face marked with the deep grooves that elastic leaves on skin after too many hours. Ethan stood so fast the chair legs scraped. "Maya Bennett?" The surgeon looked at the tablet in her hand. "Family?" Ethan hesitated. "No. Friend." Janice rose too and hovered half a step behind him. The surgeon, Dr. Allison Reeves, according to her badge, gave the kind of look doctors master when they have to deliver truth in controlled doses. "She made it through surgery," she said. Ethan's knees nearly gave out from relief before the rest of the sentence arrived. "She has a fractured clavicle, severe soft tissue damage to the shoulder, 2 broken ribs, a small splenic laceration we are watching closely, and significant blood loss. We stabilized her. She is not out of danger." Relief and fear collided so hard in Ethan's chest, it left him feeling hollowed out. "Can I see her?" "Briefly. Once recovery clears her." Dr. Reeves glanced at the chart again. "I also need to know if she has any family to notify." Ethan opened his mouth and then closed it. He knew pieces. Younger sister in Phoenix maybe. Estranged father in Missouri. An ex-husband mentioned once with flat disgust and no detail. He hated how much of her life he still only knew through fragments. "I'm not sure who she'd want called." The doctor nodded, unsurprised. "Then we wait until she can answer." As the surgeon moved away, Delaney appeared from near the nurse's station as if he had been summoned by the word stable. He approached with measured patience, stopping at a socially acceptable distance. "Good news?" Ethan turned toward him slowly. "She survived." Delaney nodded in a way that suggested survival was a procedural inconvenience. "Glad to hear it." He lowered his voice. "Now we can clear up the issue of the documents before this becomes something uglier than it needs to be." Janice's head snapped toward him. Ethan felt that old, cold anger settle back into place. Firmer now, better shaped. "You keep saying documents," he said. "Interesting choice, since I never mentioned any." Delaney held his gaze. No smile this time. No pretense either. Just 2 men standing under fluorescent light with the same truth between them. "Mr. Think. Cole," he said quietly. "There are people who can make this very hard on you." Ethan glanced toward the recovery hallway, where Maya lay stitched together just enough to keep suffering. He thought of Mercer, of promises broken by institutions and by himself, of Lena saying daylight is your only protection, of Maya whispering, "Don't let them make me disappear." And maybe that was the real choice beneath all the others, the one he had been dodging since the ravine. Not whether to help her, whether he was willing to become the version of himself he had sworn never to be again, the man who lit fuses and then stood too close to the blast. He looked back at Delaney and understood, with a strange calm, that the refusal itself would change everything. "Then tell them," Ethan said, each word precise. "To get in line." Delaney's face went still. Not anger, not surprise. Recognition. He had finally placed Ethan, not just as a nuisance, not just as a witness, but as the kind of problem that spreads when handled badly. He gave one small nod, almost respectful in its hostility, then stepped back. "Careful," he said. "You're not in Chicago anymore." Ethan watched him walk away and thought, no, worse. Because Chicago at least admitted what it was. Here the mountains and money let people pretend corruption was just networking with better views. He sat down again only because his rib made the alternative impossible. Janice lowered herself into the chair beside him, silent for a few seconds. "That seemed unwise," she said finally. "Probably. You still mean it?" Ethan looked at the satchel in his lap, then at the hallway where Maya had disappeared, then at the television above them, where Richard Vale was smiling soundlessly with a champagne flute in his hand, while captions praised a healthcare access initiative funded in part by Caroline Wren. The hypocrisy was almost boring in its elegance. That was the problem. Evil was rarely theatrical. Mostly it arrived pressed, moisturized, and media-trained. "Yeah," he said. "I mean it." His phone buzzed. Lena again. "Crew wheels up in 20. Go nowhere alone. Also, Ethan, don't vanish on me before dawn." He stared at that last line longer than the rest. Janice leaned back, folding her arms against the hospital chill. "You've got that look," she said. "What look?" "The one people get before they ruin the rest of their own week on principle." Despite everything, Ethan smiled faintly. "That accurate?" "Honey, I'm an ER nurse. I can identify self-destructive righteousness at 30 feet. The smile died almost as quickly as it came. He looked toward recovery again, listening to the hospital breathe around them, the overhead announcements, the rolling wheels, the layered human exhaustion of a place that keeps death busy enough to delay it sometimes. Somewhere behind those doors, Maya was alive, which was not the same as safe. Somewhere on the roads below, cameras and lawyers and handlers were already being roused by phone trees built for exactly this kind of emergency. He felt the fracture line opening beneath all of it. Saving the truth might destroy what was left of Maya's private life. Protecting Maya might bury the dead she had found. Exposing the network might turn him into the weapon they needed and the casualty they preferred. There was no version of this that ended with gratitude and healing music. Just decisions, just cost, just dawn coming whether any of them were ready for it or not. There was no version of this that ended with gratitude and healing music. Just decisions, just cost, just dawn coming whether any of them were ready for it or not. Dawn arrived in pieces. First as a thinning of the dark beyond the ER's glass doors, then as a blue-gray wash over the parking lot where snowplows pushed heavy ridges of slush into dirty piles. Then as a pale, reluctant light climbing the mountains beyond Aspen, like it had been summoned by obligation rather than hope. Ethan had not slept. He had drifted through an hour of paperwork, another of waiting, and a third of intermittent movement between the vending machines, the chairs, the recovery desk, and the restroom mirror where he barely recognized the bruised man looking back at him. His face had begun to change shape under swelling. The cut along his hairline pulled when he frowned. His eyes looked red-rimmed and older than they had the day before, and there was something in them he hated seeing again, that narrow, dangerous focus he had spent years trying to outgrow. Beside him, Janice eventually dozed in a plastic chair with her arms crossed, coffee untouched in her lap, her body somehow maintaining the posture of someone still on duty even in sleep. The television cycled through morning headlines, weather, markets, traffic. Then, just after 6, a local anchor began discussing a late-night vehicle incident involving an employee of Denver-based healthcare innovator Aegis Biodyne. Ethan looked up so fast his ribs seized. On-screen footage showed only the canyon road taped off in the pre-dawn dark, and a polished statement graphic from Aegis. "We are aware of an unfortunate automobile accident involving one of our valued team members. We are in contact with local authorities and praying for her recovery." Ethan felt his teeth grind together. Not a word about whistleblowing. Not a word about evidence. Just language so smooth it felt prefabricated, as if they had a drawer full of emergency empathy waiting for situations like this. "That was quick," Janice murmured, waking without fully opening her eyes. Ethan didn't answer. His phone buzzed with a message from Lena. "Station has enough to tease. Not enough to air full allegation package. Need confirmation from Maya or second source. I'm on my way. 2 hours. Do not talk to anyone on camera yet." Another buzz followed immediately. Unknown number. He stared at it until it stopped, then started again. Same number. He answered on the third ring without saying hello. "Mr. Cole." Female voice. Mid-50s, controlled, expensive. "This is Caroline Wren." Ethan sat very still. Even Janice, half awake, sensed the shift and straightened slightly. "That's bold," he said. "It's efficient," Wren replied. Her tone was warm in the way private schools teach, and hostile people borrow. "I've been informed you are in possession of company materials removed unlawfully by one of my employees. I'm also told Miss Bennett is in no condition to explain herself, which leaves you in an unfortunate position." Ethan looked out the glass doors at the gray morning and imagined her somewhere much warmer, perhaps in a town car or penthouse, or on a private line, routed through layers of staff who would never hear her say anything careless. "You move fast," he said. "You move clumsily," she answered. "There's a difference." He almost admired the clean cruelty of it. Janice was openly watching him now. He turned slightly away. "Let me guess. You're calling to pray for our recovery." "I'm calling because, if those materials reach a newsroom before council reviews them, you will create damage you cannot begin to calculate." Ethan's fingers tightened around the phone. Damage to who? To patients. To pending treatments. To legal exposure. that will freeze active care partnerships across 3 states. She did not rush. She didn't need to. This was someone used to speaking from the top of structures other people climbed to impress. Whatever you think, miss, Bennett found, you do not understand the operational consequences of releasing partial information. Ethan heard, beneath the composure. The strategy: widen the moral frame until accountability looks reckless. It was effective because it was never entirely false. Scandals did destroy good work along with bad. Investigations did freeze programs that helped real people. Corruption rarely lived in a room by itself. 7 dead that she could confirm, Ethan said quietly. Wren paused for the first time. Not long, but enough. 7 events, mischaracterized by someone outside her expertise, she said. Medicine is not journalism, Mr. Cole. It is not storytelling, and it is certainly not improved by amateur theatrics. Something in him almost laughed at that. Not from humor, but from the old, familiar disgust of hearing powerful people talk as if interpretation belonged only to the already protected. And attempted murder? He asked. Is that also a characterization issue? Another pause. Be very careful, Wren said. The warmth had thinned. Accidents happen in snow. Sure. I'm offering you an exit. That landed harder than the threat. Ethan hated that it did. You turn over the materials. You make no statements until counsel has reviewed the facts. Miss Bennett receives the best care available, privately if necessary. This becomes an internal compliance matter rather than a public circus. In return, your own involvement remains exactly what it should be. Incidental. He looked through the waiting room toward the recovery hall again. Private care, resources, protection. A cocoon built by the same hands that might have pushed Maya off the road, or looked away while someone else did. The offer was monstrous because it contained comfort. His body hurt. Maya needed safety. The evidence was incomplete. Public exposure could bury truth under denial before it matured into proof. Every rationalization arrived wearing practical shoes. He could feel them lining up inside him. Wren continued, softer now, sensing the terrain. You were a serious reporter once, which means you know the difference between a meaningful disclosure and a self-indulgent leak. Do not confuse adrenaline for ethics. Ethan closed his eyes. He remembered Mercer's widow sitting at a kitchen table in Naperville, with untouched casserole dishes stacked in her fridge and saying, "You people tell the truth, and then leave town." He had left town. The paper had run a week of righteous headlines, and moved on. She had stayed with the debt and the stare of every neighbor. The story had mattered. The wreckage had mattered too. Maybe, he said slowly. The problem is that you're assuming you get to define responsible. Wren's voice cooled completely. No. The problem is that you are tired, injured, and making decisions under emotional duress. If you continue, you will not be protecting Miss Daughter, Bennett. You will be isolating her. Do you think insurers don't read headlines? Boards? Prosecutors? There are ways to survive scrutiny, Mr. Cole. There are very few ways to survive scandal. Ethan looked at Janice. She held his gaze for a second, reading enough to know this was not a normal conversation. Why call me directly? He asked. Because the sheriff's department is provincial, because legal is slower than I like, and because you strike me as someone who still wants to believe he can tell the difference between help and spectacle. Ethan, let that sit. Then, if you cared about helping, you'd be at her bedside. If I were there, Wren said, you would call it intimidation. Probably because it would be. Wren breathed out once, controlled even in annoyance. You have until noon. After that, events move beyond courtesy. The line clicked dead. Ethan held the silent phone against his ear for a beat longer, as if maybe the emptiness might explain itself, then lowered it. Janice asked, "Friend of yours?" "No," he said. "That's what the opposite sounds like when it's educated." He relayed the conversation in short pieces, while Janice listened with the expression of someone sorting triage categories. Immediate, delayed, expectant. When he finished, she said, "So now you've got cops, executives, and probably lawyers moving before breakfast. Feels healthy. That's one word. Not the one I'd use." She stood and stretched her back until it popped. "What does your newsroom woman say?" Ethan checked his messages again. Lena had sent another. "We got a source in the AG's office saying there were quiet inquiries into Aegis 6 months ago and then nothing. Could be smoke. Could be pressure. Need. Maya conscious. Need chain intact. Hold. Hold. Hold." He typed back. Wren called. Gave until noon. Then he put the phone away before Lena could respond, because the specific act of typing made this all feel too official, too kinetic. He needed a human voice. He needed Maya awake. At 6:43, Dr. Reeves returned. hair damp from a rushed hand wash, eyes more tired than before. "She's asking for you," she said. Ethan stood so abruptly the chair tipped behind him. Recovery was dimmer than the ER, quieter in a way that made every machine sound more intimate. Soft monitor tones, ventilation whispering through ceiling vents, the rubbery scent of gloves and antiseptic mixed with the faint copper trace of blood no amount of cleaning ever fully erased. Maya lay in a curtained bay with heated blankets tucked around her, and one arm immobilized, skin waxy under the light, lips dry, hair brushed away from the sutures at her temple. She looked both older and younger like this, stripped of her usual alertness, the edges of her controlled persona dissolved by pain medication and trauma. Ethan moved to the bedside slowly, afraid even now that speed might break something. Her eyes opened a little wider when she saw him. "You look awful," she whispered. He gave a weak breath of a laugh. "That's rude. You're not exactly glowing." A tiny shadow of a smile touched her mouth and vanished. The monitor recorded her heart rate lifting. He pulled the visitor chair close and sat, careful of his rib. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was too much in the room. Gratitude, anger, survival. The knowledge that surviving an attempt did not erase the existence of the attempt. Maya's gaze drifted to the satchel, still looped over his wrist. "You kept it." "Yeah." "Did they try?" He hesitated. "Yes." Her eyes closed briefly, not in surprise but in exhausted confirmation. "Delaney? And your boss?" Caroline called. Maya's eyelids snapped open fully despite the pain. "What did she say?" Ethan repeated the substance without embellishment. As he spoke, Maya stared at the ceiling, jaw tightening with each sentence. When he finished, she swallowed painfully. "She does that," Maya said. "Makes coercion sound like adult supervision." Ethan looked at her face, at the effort it took just to speak. "How long have you known?" Her answer took time, not because she was searching for the truth, but because the truth had too many doors. Suspected? A year. Knew enough to be scared? 4 months. He waited. "I was reviewing grant compliance for mobile oncology partnerships in Western counties. Numbers kept reconciling on paper, but not in patient transfer records. The dead disappeared one way. The money disappeared another." She blinked slowly, gathering herself. "I thought at first it was billing fraud. Then I found mortality adjustments tied to a trial code I couldn't trace through standard filings. That should have been impossible." Her voice weakened. He leaned in to hear. "I pulled more than I was supposed to." Quietly. Cross-referenced shell boards, donor entities, land purchases near closed hospitals. Wren's people were consolidating care deserts and then using those patients as statistical clay. Ethan felt something inside him pull taut. Hearing it from her in this room made it less like a story and more like a contamination spreading from body to body. "Why me?" he asked before he could stop himself. The question hung there immediately, uglier than he wanted it to sound. Maya looked at him, really looked, and whatever medication dulled her pain did not dull the hurt in her face. "Because you know what buried truth smells like," she said, "and because I trusted that if it got bad enough, you'd still care even after you resented me for it." Ethan sat back a fraction, hit by the accuracy of that harder than accusation would have hit. He had resented her, not for the danger. For the way she had reawakened parts of him he wanted dead. The watchfulness, the obsession, the feeling that a meaningful life had to brush up against ruin to count. "You should have told me how far in you were," he said quietly. "I tried." "No, you warned me in pieces. Because every time I said more, you looked at me like I was dragging you back into a fire." Her voice shook now, from pain or anger or both. "And maybe I was. But don't stand there now and act like you had no agency, Ethan. You stayed." The monitor ticked faster. He saw the strain he was causing and hated himself immediately. He lowered his voice. "I know." Maya exhaled carefully, each breath measured around bruised ribs. "There's more," she said. "Not in the bag." Ethan's pulse jumped. "Where?" "Storage locker in Denver. Union Station District. Key code is in the recorder battery compartment." He stared at her. "You had a second cache and didn't tell me?" "I'm telling you now." Her eyes sharpened through the haze. "If they get the bag, it's bad. If they get the locker, it's over." He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the stitches pull. "What's in it?" "Patient testimony. Internal emails. One video deposition from a doctor who backed out. Enough to move this from suggestive to prosecutable, if anyone honest touches it." Ethan sat very still. He was aware, suddenly, of the room's smallest sounds. The soft drip of IV fluid, someone laughing too loudly down the hall, then immediately lowering their voice. The rustle of his coat when he shifted. Denver, locker, more proof, more danger, more obligation. Maya watched the calculations cross his face. "Lena?" she asked. She's coming. Maya shut her eyes again for a moment, relief and dread mixing in the fine lines around her mouth. Good. She'll know how to package chaos. Ethan almost smiled. That sounds like her. Maya opened her eyes. Ethan. What? If this breaks, they'll come for me professionally first. Discredit, mental health, performance issues. Probably say I stole documents because I was unstable or angry over promotion track. She swallowed. My sister will see it before I can call her. My father too, maybe. He'll enjoy it. There it was, the fracture already visible. Exposure was not justice. Exposure was a machine that chewed context along with lies. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on knees, satchel hanging from his wrist like a weight attached to bone. We can still slow it down, he said, though even as he said it he heard the weakness. Maya gave him a tired, almost pitying look. No, we can't. Not really. The minute Caroline called you, the choice got smaller. They're already writing versions of me. Ethan knew she was right. The truth no longer lived in a sealed envelope waiting for the perfect moral delivery. It was moving now. Through calls. Through local news phrasing. Through deputies and executives and texts between frightened staff and opportunistic lawyers. The question was no longer whether to release. It was whether to shape the release fast enough that the lies didn't become the first official draft. Then we do it right, he said. Maya studied him. You sound like you hate that answer. I hate all of them. That earned the ghost of a real smile. Good. Means you're paying attention. A nurse stepped in to check her vitals and pain level, smiling with the brisk kindness people reserve for patients they are trying not to frighten. Ethan stood aside, but Maya's fingers caught weakly around two of his before he fully moved away. Not romantic, not performative, reflexive. Human. He stood there while the nurse adjusted medication and reminded Maya not to overtalk. And in that simple grip, he felt the entire cost of what came next. Not abstract dead patients, not institutional rot, not even his own relapsed appetite for the fight. Her, the actual living person in the bed, who would survive this only to be disassembled in public by people better funded and more practiced than she was. The nurse left. Maya released his hand. You should go before they box the hospital, she whispered. Ethan frowned. Box? Caroline won't trust local cops forever. She'll send counsel, private security, crisis management. They'll start smiling in hallways and requesting privacy. He looked toward the door. She was right again. The window was closing. I don't want to leave you. I know. Her voice softened. That's why you have to. He almost said something stupid then. Something about coming back. About promises. About not disappearing. But he had become wary of promises made under hospital lighting. They sounded noble and expired quickly. Instead, he asked, Do you want me to call your sister before this hits? Maya's face changed, not visibly at first, but in the way tension moved behind it. No. Then after a second, yes, later. Not until Lena gets here. I need 1 hour of not being a headline to my family. Ethan nodded. You get it. He stood, every movement reminding him of the rib he had ignored. I'll be back. Maya looked at him like she could see the sentence for what it was. An intention, not a guarantee. Just don't freeze, she said. You do that when it matters most. You go still and call it thinking. The words landed with merciless precision because they were true. He had done that with Mercer, with Lena, with every choice that demanded not intelligence but emotional risk. He nodded once. Not this time. When he stepped back into the hallway, the hospital felt subtly changed. Not louder, more occupied. 2 men in dark overcoats stood near the elevators, speaking quietly with administration. One woman in a cream blazer reviewed notes on a tablet with the posture of someone who belonged everywhere important. Delaney was nowhere visible, which was worse than if he had been. Janice rose when she saw Ethan's face. That look again, she said. I know. He checked his phone. 2 missed calls from Lena. 1 text, landing in 40. Keep moving toward Denver if possible. If you wait, they shape the scene without us. He looked back once toward Maya's room, though the door was already closed, and all he could see was his own reflection in the narrow glass. Then he tightened his grip on the satchel, felt the hidden fold of paper still tucked inside his gown, and started walking toward the exit with the peculiar, sinking understanding that the next step would save the evidence and leave her behind in the very system now preparing to consume her. And started walking toward the exit with the peculiar, sinking understanding that the next step would save the evidence and leave her behind in the very system now preparing to consume her. The hospital's front lobby had changed in the hour since sunrise. It now carried that polished morning energy institutions wore when money arrived before breakfast. The volunteer desk was staffed. The coffee kiosk had opened. A custodian buffed a section of floor no one needed buffed, while pretending not to notice the woman in the cream blazer speaking in low tones with an administrator near the elevators. A man in a navy overcoat with a silver tie clip stood by the doors, scrolling through his phone and scanning faces between taps. Not police. Too expensive for police. Too careful for family. Ethan slowed without stopping, feeling the rib in his side burn each time he drew a full breath. Janice was half a step behind him now, coat on, jaw set, having insisted on walking him out with the kind of matter-of-fact stubbornness that made refusal seem childish. "That one by the doors," she murmured, without moving her lips. "Looks like he bills by the hour. Or ruins weekends for a living," Ethan said. He kept the satchel tucked under his arm and angled his body so the strap wasn't obvious. His phone buzzed again. "Lena, 2 minutes out. Don't leave alone." Ethan stopped just short of the sliding doors. The snow outside had thinned to a bright granular drift under thin sun, and the parking lot looked temporarily innocent, all white glare and mountain air and expensive SUVs wearing chains. It struck him, not for the first time, how violence in America often hid inside pretty places with clean branding. Not always alleys, not always back rooms. Sometimes it lived in nonprofits, hospital wings, donor galas, and roads lined with pine trees worth photographing. The man in the navy overcoat looked up from his phone and approached with a smile that managed to be both pleasant and invasive. "Mr. Cole?" Ethan did not answer immediately. The man extended a hand anyway. "Daniel Price, counsel for Aegis Biodyne." Ethan looked at the hand until Price lowered it himself. "That was fast," Ethan said. "We're very concerned about Miss Bennett." "I'll bet." Price ignored the tone. "I'd prefer not to do this in a lobby. Perhaps we can step into a conference room and discuss the return of company property." Janice let out a soft snort. Price glanced at her, recalibrated, then returned to Ethan. "There are lawful ways to handle internal disputes that protect patient confidentiality and avoid catastrophic misreporting. Your CEO used almost the exact same line. Then she saved me. Time." Ethan felt something brittle in himself go almost calm. He had expected threats, maybe louder ones. Instead, he kept getting professionalism as a delivery system for containment, and that somehow angered him more. "You all talk like weather forecasters before a flood," he said. "So much concern, same outcome." Price clasped his hands in front of him, the picture of reasonable patience. "Let me be direct. If any materials in your possession include protected health information, unauthorized distribution exposes you and any media partner to civil and potentially criminal liability. That's before defamation, theft, and interference claims. And if the materials document buried deaths?" Ethan asked. "Then there are regulators for that." Funny how they never seem to get there. Price's smile thinned by a millimeter. "Mr. Cole, righteous improvisation is not a compliance process." The automatic doors opened behind them with a rush of cold air. Lena Ortiz came through carrying a canvas messenger bag, winter boots, dark coat half-zipped, hair pulled back like she had done it in a moving car. She looked older than the last time he had seen her, and more solid somehow, like time had stripped away anything decorative and left only intention. Her gaze found Ethan first, scanned his face, the stitches, the swelling, the satchel, then moved to Price and settled there with instant, professional contempt. "Good," she said. "You started without me." Price straightened slightly. "And you are? The person you'll regret talking around." Lena moved beside Ethan without asking permission, her shoulder close enough to register warmth through his jacket. "Lena Ortiz, senior producer, KDN 7 Denver. Off the record until I decide otherwise." Price gave a small, polite nod. "Then you understand the legal sensitivity here. I understand that companies say legal sensitivity when they mean, please let us choose the burial plot." Janice's mouth twitched. Ethan had forgotten how Lena fought, not loudly, cleanly, like someone peeling skin off an argument until only the exposed nerve remained. Price shifted tactics. "Miss Ortiz, your station would be reckless to air unverified allegations based on stolen internal documents and the assertions of a sedated employee." Ethan felt the hit of that phrase immediately. Sedated employee. There it was. The discrediting frame, already prepared. Lena heard it too. "Thanks," she said. "That wording alone just made my morning." Price looked at Ethan again. "My client is prepared to seek injunctive relief within hours." "Do it," Lena said. "But before you do, understand something. We already have time-stamped copies stored outside this building. If you want to spend the day teaching a judge why a woman landed in surgery after raising mortality discrepancies tied to your donor network, I'd love that for you." Price's eyes flicked to Ethan, a tiny confirmation that the leverage had moved. Copies, he repeated. Then the damage may already be irretrievable. No, Ethan said. Not damage. Exposure. Different word. Price held his gaze for one beat, then stepped back. You are making a serious mistake. Lena adjusted her bag higher on her shoulder. The mistake was calling it an internal matter after somebody went off a mountain. Price left without another word, but not quickly. That was the unnerving thing about people like him. Even retreat looked curated. Ethan watched him cross the lobby, stop near the administrator, say something quiet, then continue toward the elevators where the woman in the cream blazer joined him. They'll go upstairs, Janice said. Start wrapping her room in privacy language. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Maya. The simple act of leaving had already become betrayal in motion. Lena turned to him, and for the first time since arriving, her expression softened into something personal. You look terrible. You already used that line on my voicemail spiritually. No, this is visually supported. Her gaze dropped to the satchel. Do you have everything? Not everything. There's a locker in Denver. More evidence. Lena's eyes sharpened instantly. How much more? Enough to move from suggestive to prosecutable, according to Maya. Lena blew out a slow breath. Then that's the day. We get there first, duplicate everything, hand-vetted portions to counsel, and loop in someone in state oversight who hasn't already been housebroken. Janice folded her arms. And him? Lena looked Ethan over again, this time with less emotion and more logistics. He comes because he has the code, and because he's already in it. After that, we decide whether his face helps or hurts. The bluntness should have stung. Instead, it steadied him. There's one more thing, he said. Maya wants 1 hour before her family turns this into notification by headline. Lena nodded immediately. Then we give her that hour. You can do that? Janice asked. Lena's mouth flattened. I can delay a local tease and tell my desk to sit on names until I say otherwise. I cannot stop the internet or wealthy people with talking points. Ethan thought of Wren's noon deadline and almost smiled at how quaint deadlines sounded now. Time had already broken open. The only question was whose language would reach the public first. They stepped outside into the bright, punishing cold. Sunlight on snow made the entire parking lot look overexposed. Ethan squinted against it, pain flaring in his temple. Lena's car was a mud-streaked station SUV from Denver, with a press placard half hidden on the dash and coffee cups rolling in the back footwell. It smelled like stale caffeine, wet wool, and printer paper. American reporting, Ethan thought, almost fondly, never glamorous in the actual vehicle. Janice stopped beside the passenger door. I'm not coming, she said. I have a shift in Glenwood Springs I've already blown off, and some very irritated charge nurses waiting to remind me I'm not 20 anymore. Ethan looked at her, genuinely at a loss for how to thank someone who had inserted herself into a stranger's disaster and kept choosing decency each time she could have left. You already did enough. No, Janice said. I did what people are supposed to do and keep pretending is exceptional. She squeezed his forearm carefully, avoiding bruises. Try not to become the worst version of yourself because you're useful under pressure. The sentence hit harder than he expected. Maybe because she barely knew him and had still seen enough. Lena opened the driver's door. That advice feels specifically earned. Janice gave her a dry look. You know him too? Lena answered without hesitating. Unfortunately. Ethan almost laughed, and the pain from that simple near laugh reminded him his body had opinions on the day too. Janice headed toward her pickup, boots crunching across salt and slush. Ethan watched her go, then got into Lena's SUV and shut the door on the hospital, the lobby, the polished threats, and Maya lying upstairs in a room that would soon fill with official concern. For several seconds, neither he nor Lena started the car. The windshield framed the hospital entrance like a still from a procedural drama. Staff moving in and out, sunlight flattening all nuance. Then Lena turned the key. The heater groaned awake, and she said, "Tell me everything you haven't said yet." They drove south through the mountains with the radio off and the evidence spread across the back seat under a wool coat like contraband scripture. The road was partially cleared but slick at the shaded bends, snowbanks rising on either side where plows had shoved the night aside without actually removing it. Aspen receded behind them, replaced by stretches of white fields, bare trees, gas stations with faded Pepsi signs, and the occasional pickup throwing up dirty spray. America looked different after a sleepless night and a near-fatal crash. Not larger, more patched together. Convenience stores, chain pharmacies, churches beside pawn shops, urgent care clinics beside shuttered diners. Systems failing in visible increments. It made perfect sense, Ethan thought. that a healthcare scandal would move through places like this, places where distance and exhaustion did half the silencing for you. Lena drove with both hands on the wheel, jaw set, eyes flicking between road and mirrors with the focused caution of someone whose mind was elsewhere but whose body knew better than to show it on ice. Ethan told her about the recorder battery compartment, the locker, Caroline's call, Delaney's specific language, Maya's explanation of the mortality adjustments. Lena asked efficient questions. Dates, names. Did Maya ever say which doctor recorded the video deposition? Did the shell entities overlap with campaign finance? Did the rural closures align with land purchases or only service redirection? He answered as best he could. When he couldn't, he said so. There was no room left for performance between them. Somewhere near Glenwood Springs, after 40 minutes of procedural exchange, silence settled in. Not awkward, just inevitable. The heater rattled. Tires hissed over melt and slush. Ethan watched sunlight strike the Colorado River in broken flashes as it tracked beside the highway. You disappeared, Lena said finally, eyes on the road. He let the sentence sit, because it was both less and more than an accusation. Yeah, I told myself that was probably healthier than the alternative. Was it? She gave a short smile with no joy in it. For who? He turned his head to look at her profile, familiar in a way that felt unfair after so much time. Different lines around the mouth, the same steadiness under stress. He remembered her apartment in D.C., remembered a plant she kept alive out of spite, remembered how she used to read scripts aloud while brushing her teeth. Memory was rude that way. It arrived with domestic details when catastrophe wanted cleaner edges. I thought if I stopped doing the work, he said quietly, I'd stop dragging people into it. So you dragged yourself somewhere quieter and called it growth. That's not entirely wrong. No, she said. It's just incomplete. He almost asked whether she was happy now, whether she had someone, whether leaving him had made her life calmer in the ways she deserved. But the car was full of evidence and road salt and survival. And those questions belonged to a parallel morning no longer available. Instead, he said, I'm sorry. Lena's fingers tightened once on the wheel. I know. That doesn't make it unusable, but I know. They drove another mile. Then she said, with professional neutrality so deliberate it was almost tender, for the record, I'm glad you called me. Ethan looked out the window at a truck stop sliding by. Diesel pumps and snow-blackened piles, and a man in a Broncos hoodie carrying a cardboard tray of coffees into a work van. Life going on. People buying breakfast while other people's worlds detonated 2 counties over. So am I, he said. Her phone rang through the car speakers. Denver bureau chief. She answered one-handed. Talk to me. A man's voice came through, tinny with road noise. Og's office is jittery. Someone there remembers a memo on rural trial irregularities that stalled after donor pressure. We've got a former Aegis project manager willing to talk if protected. Lena shot Ethan a look. Name? Miller. Dana Miller. She says if this is what she thinks it is, Bennett was never the only one collecting. Ethan felt his stomach turn. Not because it complicated the story, but because it clarified the scale. Maya had not been a lone moral outlier. She had been part of a cluster, which meant others had gone quiet, been pushed out, or were still inside praying they'd guessed wrong. Keep her warm, Lena said. No promises, no details. We'll circle back after we secure the Denver material. She ended the call. Ethan rubbed his eyes with thumb and forefinger. That changes the timeline. It changes the confidence level, Lena corrected. And it means once we hit Denver, we're no longer just protecting Maya. We're opening a door other people may run through. He nodded, but dread moved under the agreement. More witnesses meant stronger proof. It also meant less control, more damage vectors, more lives fed into the machine. He thought of Maya asking for 1 hour before her family found out. 1 hour already almost gone. He took out his phone and saw 3 missed calls from an unknown Phoenix number. Her sister, maybe, or someone working on behalf of someone else. He turned the phone face down in his lap. You can't keep her family in the dark much longer, Lena said. I know. But you don't want the first version they hear to be drafted by Caroline Wren. I know. He stared ahead. The highway flattened as they left the higher mountain corridor, civilization thickening by degrees. More exits, warehouses, fast food signs, billboards promising injury attorneys and dental implants and luxury ranch communities. American confidence sold in giant fonts against a winter sky. Ethan felt the beginning of the final arc with the clarity of a bruise pressed on purpose. Denver would not resolve this. It would formalize it. The locker, the copies, the lawyers, the first measured release, the inevitable counterattack. Maya would live and be damaged. Truth would surface and arrive bleeding. Some dead would get names back. Others would remain buried under settlements and time. There would be no clean ending, because clean endings were for people whose enemies weren't institutional. Lena changed lanes and said, "When we get there, no improvising. We copy, log, split storage, contact counsel, call her sister, and only then decide what goes on air." Ethan nodded. "And if Ren moves first?" Lena's eyes stayed on the road. "Then we make sure she regrets the order." The city began to gather in the distance, Denver's winter skyline, pale and metallic under a washed-out sun, and Ethan felt his pulse slow, not from calm, but from recognition. This was the moment before impact in a different form. Not the ravine. The release. The choice to translate private fear into public consequence. He reached into his pocket, took out the voice recorder, and turned it over once in his hand, feeling its cheap plastic edges, the ordinary object carrying an extraordinary burden. Then he slid it back into his coat and watched the city come closer, knowing that by nightfall, the story would belong to the world, and to everyone it was about, and to none of them in the ways that mattered most. Then he slid it back into his coat and watched the city come closer, knowing that by nightfall, the story would belong to the world and to everyone it was about, and to none of them in the ways that mattered most. Denver met them with dirty snow pushed to curbs, glass towers reflecting a colorless sky, and the familiar urban choreography of delivery trucks, cyclists in black jackets, people clutching coffees and hurrying through crosswalks like urgency itself was a weather pattern. Lena took them downtown instead of to the station first, winding through Lodo traffic and then east toward Union Station, where the old brick facade stood, polished and self-conscious above the churn of commuters, tourists, and the housed and unhoused sharing the same winter air with radically different margins for error. Ethan felt the city in his bones before he fully saw it. Not because Denver had once been his, but because cities like this all carried the same nervous system: courthouse stone, light rail wires, money disguised as progress, and 1,000 quiet places where people passed information to each other hoping it would change something. Lena parked in a short-term garage and killed the engine. Neither moved immediately. The windshield framed the station plaza, where a woman in a camel coat pulled a rolling suitcase through slush, while 2 construction workers laughed over breakfast burritos near a food truck. Ethan pressed his thumb against the ache beneath his ribs and let the practical reality settle over the cinematic tension in his head. They had made it here. That did not mean they had won a thing. "What's the code location again?" Lena asked. "Battery compartment in the recorder." He took it out, pried open the back with a fingernail, and shook a tiny folded strip of paper into his palm. The numbers were written in Maya's compact hand. 6 digits. Beneath them, 2 words: lower tier. Lena read over his shoulder. "Good. Specific is sexy." Ethan almost smiled. "You still say weird things under pressure." "I've upgraded from yelling." She opened her door. "Bring the bag." The station interior was all restored grandeur and managed warmth, high ceilings, polished wood benches, coffee lines, travelers dragging hard-shell luggage across tile, while announcements drifted overhead in a neutral female voice. Ethan followed Lena through the central hall, every polished surface making him more aware of the bruising in his face and the stiffness in his gait. He caught 1 or 2 glances from strangers. Nothing dramatic, just the American instinct to clock damage and look away unless it becomes your problem. The lower-tier storage hall was quieter, fluorescent and functional. The glamour stripped off. Rows of lockers, concrete floor, a security camera in one corner, a janitor's cart abandoned near a utility closet. Lena scanned the ceiling, the camera, the entrances, then stepped slightly aside. "Do it." Ethan entered the code carefully, aware of how clumsy his swollen fingers felt. The lock clicked. He opened the metal door and stared. Inside was a gray banker's box, 2 external hard drives taped in bubble wrap, a manila folder, and a small cosmetic bag that looked almost absurdly ordinary among everything else. Lena let out a low breath. "Okay." Ethan lifted the box onto the floor. Inside were neatly tabbed files, handwritten notes, printed email chains, 3 sealed envelopes labeled with names he didn't recognize, and a USB card holder. The cosmetic bag contained prescription bottles not for Maya, but for someone named Dana Miller, an inhaler, and a burner phone. "Dana," Lena said immediately. "Project manager source." Ethan picked up one of the sealed envelopes. "You think Maya was holding material for more than herself?" "I think Maya was building an insurance policy made of other scared people." Lena crouched beside him and began sorting fast, practiced, eyes moving with frightening efficiency. "This is better than I hoped and worse than I wanted." Ethan opened the manila folder. Inside was a transcript header, video statement of Dr. Simon Hale. Another sheet showed metadata and chain notes. He flipped deeper and found screenshots of internal messaging between executives using euphemisms so polished they made him sick. Event migration, community risk balancing, Narrative containment. The words sat on the page in calm corporate font, bloodless and devastating. Lena took one hard drive and held it up. We don't stay here and read. We split. There's a copy shop 3 blocks over that does legal scanning. My field producer's meeting us there with a laptop and fresh drives. Ethan nodded, then stopped as a thought hit him sideways. Call Maya's sister now. Lena looked up. He took out his phone and dialed the Phoenix number that had been haunting his missed calls. It rang once, twice. Then a woman answered breathlessly, as if she had been waiting with the phone in her hand. Maya? Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. No, this is Ethan Cole. Are you Rachel Bennett? Silence crashed down the line. Then, cautious and sharpened, why do you have my sister's phone? She's alive, he said quickly. She was in an accident outside Aspen. She's in the hospital. She made it through surgery. Rachel exhaled so hard it almost sounded like a sob strangled in the chest before it could become one. Oh my God, she's alive? Yes. He leaned against the locker bank, feeling the cold metal through his coat. She asked for a little time before things spread publicly. I'm sorry I couldn't call sooner. Rachel's voice changed, fear making room for anger because anger was easier to hold. What things? Ethan looked at Lena. She was deliberately not listening but hearing enough. There may be news coverage later today connected to her work, he said carefully. I wanted you to hear from a person first. What kind of work? Healthcare compliance. I know what she does, Rachel snapped. I mean, what kind of news coverage? Ethan felt the edge he was standing on. Too much, and he'd drag Maya's family into chaos without preparation. Too little, and he'd sound deceptive. She found information that could put her employer and some political people under scrutiny. Rachel went very quiet. When she spoke again, the anger was gone, replaced by something flatter and older. She said this might happen. Ethan straightened. She told you? Not details. Just that if anything happened to her, it wouldn't really be an accident. Ethan looked down at the transcript in his hand and felt grief move in under adrenaline. Maya had been alone in this for longer than he knew. Not just professionally, existentially. Can you get to Colorado? He asked. Rachel gave a humorless laugh. I'm a public school counselor with 2 kids and a suspended credit card. I can get anxious. I don't know if I can get to Colorado. Ethan absorbed that. Practical American truth. Family love filtered through airfare, childcare, and debt. I understand. Do you? She asked, not cruelly, just tired. Because I'm trying to figure out whether my sister almost died because she's brave, or because nobody around her told her to stop. The question hit with surgical precision. Ethan had no clean answer. Both, he said finally. Rachel was silent for a long moment. She'll hate that answer. Probably. Good. Means it's honest. He gave her the hospital name, Dr. Reeves's unit, Lena's station line, and his own number, then promised to update her as soon as he could. Another promise. He felt each one like added weight. When the call ended, he stood staring at the dead screen until Lena touched his elbow lightly. You did what you could. That doesn't feel impressive anymore. It never was. It's just the job. They packed the materials into 2 separate bags, leaving the empty locker open only long enough for Lena to photograph its contents in place. Chain of custody. Context. Insurance against later claims that they had manufactured or rearranged. Then they moved. Outside, the cold bit harder now that the sun was higher. Wind slicing between buildings and carrying the smell of exhaust, roasted coffee, and old snow. The copy shop was narrow, overheated, and run by a man who clearly understood from Lena's expression and cash payment that no questions were wanted. Field producer Marcus arrived 5 minutes later, younger than Ethan expected, with a rolling case full of drives, a scanner rig, granola bars, and the caffeinated alertness of someone who had been told the day mattered. This the whole thing? Marcus asked, taking in the banker's box. Probably not, Lena said, but it's enough to ruin lunch for the powerful. They worked in a back room under bright task lighting while printers hummed and the front bell chimed each time a customer entered. Ethan scanned, photographed, logged, and sorted until time lost shape. His rib throbbed continuously now, a metronome under everything. Marcus duplicated the drives. Lena called counsel. Then a former federal prosecutor turned media attorney named Sheila Brandt, whose voice on speaker sounded like she sharpened knives recreationally. Sheila reviewed the basics and said, "No one goes live with patient-specific details. Strip identifiers unless directly essential. Keep raw materials split across at least 4 locations. If they threaten injunction, let them. Truth plus public interest reporting buys room, but sloppiness kills it. And if there's a witness willing to go on background today, get them before management rounds them up." Dana Miller, Ethan thought. Another life about to be dragged into light. By early afternoon, they had enough organized for a controlled first report, the existence of internal documents suggesting undisclosed trial-related deaths, and donor-linked financial routing involving Aegis entities, and organizations associated with Senator Vale. The fact that a company compliance analyst who had raised concerns was hospitalized after a suspicious crash. The existence of corroborating material under legal review. Not everything. Enough. Never enough. Lena stood by the back work table writing the teaser copy by hand first, as she always had, refining verbs like they were explosives. Ethan watched her, remembering nights in D.C., when he used to think the right phrase could redeem any cost. He no longer believed that. But he still believed phrases could determine who absorbed the first hit. That mattered. Marcus finished uploading a secure packet to council and looked up. Station's asking if you're coming in for the 5. Lena did not look away from the page. No, we record here, then I go in later. She glanced at Ethan. You on camera? He felt the question move through him like a blade finding old scar tissue. The instinctive answer was no. Protect Maya. Avoid spectacle. Don't become the face, because the face becomes easier to attack than the facts. But there was another truth. Ren had already begun shaping him into incidental collateral, maybe obsessive ex-reporter, maybe unstable companion, maybe nothing at all. Silence would not make him less visible. It would just leave his outline for other people to draw. Off camera, he said. Voice only, if needed. Let the documents lead. Lena studied him, then nodded. Good. Vanity is expensive. He sat on a plastic stool while Marcus set up a small recording rig for Lena's live hit, and suddenly, absurdly, exhaustion crashed into him so hard he thought he might slide onto the floor. Not sleepiness. System failure. The kind that comes when a body decides adrenaline has been freeloading too long. He pressed both hands to the stool edges until the wave passed. In that moment, Mercer came back to him with vicious clarity. Not the widow this time. The source himself, standing outside the federal building in a gray suit, gone shiny at the elbows, saying, "Just don't let them say I did this for money." They had said worse. After the story imploded under injunctions and counterclaims, the man's history got shredded on local radio and in court filings. Gambling debt, prescription issues, one ugly old domestic call with charges dropped. Ethan had watched a complicated, damaged truth-teller be converted into an inventory of defects, and he had never forgiven himself for not anticipating how quickly institutions weaponized biography. He looked now at the banker's box, the drives, the envelopes with other names, and understood that this part of the story was already happening again. Rachel would be framed. Maya would be framed. Dana would be framed. He would be framed. The public would be handed usable archetypes instead of human beings. There was no way to stop that fully, only to interrupt it fast enough that the lie didn't become the only shape available. His phone buzzed. Hospital, he answered instantly. Doctor. Reeves's voice was controlled, but not calm enough for comfort. Mr. Cole, Miss Bennett asked, that I call you because there are now 2 representatives here claiming to be acting on her behalf. One is company counsel. One states he is from the senator's office as a constituent liaison, which makes no sense. Security has limited access, but this will not hold indefinitely without family instruction. Ethan stood so quickly, the stool skidded. Has she consented to any of them? No. Can you document that clearly? Already done. Ethan closed his eyes. Her sister Rachel Bennett is next of kin contact. I'll text you her number. Please note that any media or legal access should wait for her or Maya's explicit approval. I can note it, Dr. Reeves said. I cannot guarantee everyone will behave. Neither can I, Ethan said softly. When the call ended, he relayed it. Lena swore under her breath, once, efficiently. Then we release the first piece now. Before they managed the bedside into a press statement. Sheila, still on speaker from another line, said, agreed, narrow, factual, defensible. Then request comment from Aegis and the senator simultaneously with deadline. Make them choose in writing how they want to lie. Marcus grinned involuntarily and then, seeing no one else smiling, looked back down at his laptop. The next 20 minutes moved with the frightening smoothness of practiced crisis. Lena recorded a stand-up from the alley behind the shop against a neutral brick wall instead of the hospital. Voice steady, language precise, no theatricality. Marcus cut it together with document stills, scrubbed metadata, and the photograph of Vale with Ren cropped tight enough to be relevant and defensible. Sheila approved the language with 3 changes. Ethan sent Rachel a text warning her the first report was about to air and adding, I'm sorry there wasn't a gentler way. She replied a minute later, there never is with people like this. Just don't lose her in it, at 4:07 p.m. KDN7 posted the first report online and pushed the broadcast teaser across socials. Denver TV was not national, but it was enough. More than enough. Ethan watched the headline go live on Marcus's screen and felt no triumph at all, only the sickening sensation of irreversible movement. Beneath the headline, the first comments began instantly. Prayers, skepticism, partisan reflexes, another media hit job. If true, hang them. Thoughts for the employee. Wait for facts. America, compressing human disaster into oppositional hobbies in under 30 seconds. Lena was already on her phone with the assignment desk when the responses from Aegis and Vale hit the shared inbox almost simultaneously. Aegis, we categorically deny any allegation of misconduct. Senator Vale's office. The senator has had no operational involvement in any healthcare trial activity and condemns irresponsible insinuation. Ethan read both and thought, there it is. Not surprise. Just the formal beginning of the war over grammar. Deny, insinuation, operational involvement. Each word chosen to defend what might technically be disprovable, while abandoning everything morally central. Marcus looked up from a second screen. National Aggregator just picked it up. Lena pinched the bridge of her nose, not because she was shocked, but because velocity had consequences. Then hold the next piece until we can source Dana or hear Maya directly on record. Ethan's phone rang again. This time Maya. He answered at once, stepping into the narrow corridor beside the back room. Her voice was weak and threaded with medication, but unmistakably hers. It's out? The first piece. Yes. A pause. He could hear hospital ambience on her end. Distant wheels, a monitor, somebody speaking outside her room. Rachel texted me, she said. She's furious. At me? At the universe. You're included. Despite everything, he let out a breath that almost became a laugh. It hurt. That tracks. Maya was quiet for a second. Did you get the locker? Yeah. Then it was worth leaving. Ethan leaned his head back against the wall. The corridor smelled like toner and dust and old plaster. I'm not sure worth it is the phrase I'd use. No, she said softly. Probably not. More silence. Not empty. Full. The kind that develops between people after the point where they can pretend this is just about work. Ethan heard himself ask the thing he had been avoiding all day. When this gets uglier, and it will, are you going to hate me for helping it happen? Maya took longer to answer than he expected. When she did, her voice was fragile and unsparing. I'm going to hate parts of it. I'm going to hate strangers deciding who I am. I'm going to hate watching my life get summarized by people who've never had to choose between complicity and unemployment. She drew a careful breath. But if you had taken Caroline's deal, I think eventually I would have hated you more. He shut his eyes. Relief was the wrong word. So was forgiveness. What he felt was narrower and sadder. The knowledge that the least wrong choice was still going to wound them both. Okay, he said. Okay. On the other end, she was breathing a little harder now, tiring. Ethan? Yeah. Don't stay until the end just because leaving once hurt. The sentence struck so deep he couldn't answer immediately. He understood what she meant. Not logistics. Not the newsroom. Us. Whatever this connection was, or had been building toward, catastrophe could counterfeit intimacy if you let it. Shared danger could feel like destiny right up until real life asked to be included. I don't know what that means yet, he admitted. Good, Maya whispered. Means you're not lying. The line clicked softly as a nurse took the phone, or she drifted. Ethan remained in the corridor a few seconds longer, staring at nothing, the city noise faint through the alley door. Then he went back inside. Lena looked up once, and read enough in his face not to ask for details. Outside, daylight had already begun to thin toward evening, Denver turning the color of steel and old ash. On Marcus's screen, the story kept spreading, not explosively, but steadily, outlet by outlet, lawyer by lawyer, citizen by citizen. The machinery was running now. It would grind on through the night and into the next weeks and months, through denials and subpoenas and comment requests and strategic leaks. Some people would be forced into hearings. Some would resign gracefully into other salaries. Some dead patients might finally be counted in a way their families could find. Maya might recover and lose her career. Rachel might have to defend her sister at PTA pickup in Phoenix. Ethan might wind up testifying or disappearing again, or learning, too late, that he had mistaken usefulness for redemption one more time. There was no clean solution, no orchestra waiting, just a room full of copied evidence. A woman in a hospital bed, trying not to be erased, and a city darkening outside while the first honest version of a very ugly truth fought for oxygen in public. That would have to be enough, not because it satisfied anything, but because enough was what real endings usually looked like when justice arrived late and charged interest.